So, War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This is Volume 3, Chapter 9. So, from the previous chapter, you have uh, you have you have the reinforcements finally arrived to see Emperor Alexander, and Emperor Alexander, who is the most powerful person in Russia in Russia's uh, uh, walks down the path to see all of his troops, and all of his troops really respect Prince Alexander, and everybody just really likes Prince Alexander, and Prince Alexander, and even Nicholas who likes Prince Alexander. So everybody has a big morale boost to upon seeing uh, Emperor Alexander, and lots of military drills are done to show how to impress Emperor Alexander. Okay, so now you get to chapter 9. So chapter 9 is about Boris and uh, Boris and Prince Andrew. So since Boris is Prince Andrew's friend, Boris who's obviously Boris who obviously decides that he wants to have a higher position, and he wants to be someone, he wants to be a general's, some higher person's adjutant, or basic like a man right hand man. And so Boris wants to ask uh, Andrew to help him out on to get this job and so Boris rides off to find Prince Andrew, and at first he can't find Prince Andrew, so he ends up walking around town trying to find him, but he doesn't find him, and while he's walking around, he does see a bunch of officers who he doesn't really recognize, and really recognize, and while he's there, Boris he's feels like he's in a very strange place, and he doesn't really like his surroundings, and so eventually Boris ends up finding Prince Andrew, and when Prince Andrew, and when Boris walks into the room the Prince Andrew is in. Prince Andrew is talking to some other some some other soldier, and some other soldier about about getting a job, and so usually most soldiers who come to Prince Andrew want to impress him to the point where that Prince Andrew will refer them and get them a higher position, but most of them don't really succeed because they're all pretty boring to Prince Andrew. So obviously, according to the military rules, if you want to work under a under General Kutuzov or any general, you would have to go through you would have to go through the you would have to go to you would have to go through someone else, someone else who would then refer you to the general. So Prince Andrew just so happens to be that person that can for for people to higher for people to see higher level people and generals, and so higher generals. So Boris doesn't really know if he has a chance, but he asks Prince Andrew anyways, and so Prince Andrew then agrees to help agrees to help Boris out. And so together they go to they together they instead of together they go to meet a they go to meet some higher position person. So instead of going to work going introducing Boris to General Kutsov, Prince Andrew Andrew Prince Andrew offers to introduce Boris to Prince Dubrskayov. So Dubrskayov. So this is another prince who has another 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 prince who has a who is one of the higher ups in the military, and probably higher ups of the military, and just ups of the military. And so Prince Andrew feels that it would be best for Boris to work under this guy than General Kutsov, since General Kutsov is probably a more complicated and stricter person to get people stricter person who doesn't really pick their who has a hard time picking their subordinates on who works under him. So who's under him. So Prince Andrew and Boris meet Prince Dubrskayov, and so while they're meeting, at first Prince Dubrskayov doesn't even notice Boris, and just talks to Prince Andrew, but Prince Andrew somehow manages to introduce Boris to Prince Dubrskayov, and so Dubrskayov, but before that, Prince Dubrskayov tells Prince Andrew that he just got some news from Bonaparte. So Bonaparte and the Bonaparte and Napoleon has written a letter to Emperor Alexander, and so in this letter talks about this letter, and in this letter Napoleon just wants to take as much time as possible to delay to delay the Russian forces, delay the Russian forces, and so these Russian forces anyway. So the letter is not really that important, but the way that the Russian emperor has to respond to this letter is kind of hard to respond to, because right now the Russians don't accept Napoleon as the emperor. So while they write the letter, they can't say Napoleon the emperor, and they can't, because since they don't recognize him as the emperor, and they can't also write general Napoleon, because that would be pretty rude. So they make up some good way to respond to this letter. So they have the headline as to the head of the government of France. So this way, would both this way he would both be polite and also manage polite and also manage to make 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 Napoleon get annoyed too. And so this is a pretty clever plan. So this was this plan was thought of by Bilibin, who's the who was the who was the head of the military affairs council, the one that that Prince Andrew ends up meeting to Bilibin about report about his victories, and so that is that guy. That guy. So he ends up making that plan. And so while that plan, and so eventually, Prince Derbezyov agrees to get Boris to work under him, But at that moment, something interrupts him. And which causes which makes him hold off on Boris's offer. And but eventually that matter is resolved, and Boris ends up being close to a really high level person, and when the job is done, Prince Andrew ends up walking around, and he eventually meets another high level person on the street, and that person is a minister of affairs, and this guy has lots of power and influence, and obviously Prince Andrew knows that this is going to be another very annoying matter. Yeah, that's it.